Welcome to the Mind Solution Podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution Podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution Podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind Solution Podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tony Piper, leadership, burnout and transformation coach. Goodness, that's a mouthful, Tony, but absolutely wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here, Sarah.
Now, Tony, you've got a background in IT, so I'm fascinated to understand a little bit more about how you transitioned from the world of IT and IT consultancy to become a transformational coach. So would you do us the honors of giving us an insight into your background?
Absolutely. Yeah, I spent 27 years in total working in IT. And at the beginning of my career, it was all about solving technical problems. And then as I went through the leadership journey, it was solving people-related problems. And I eventually came to realize it was the same old thing coming around again, which is, do people know what they want? Do people know how to articulate that? Do people know how to check their understanding of when somebody's articulated whatever it is? Do people feel comfortable to challenge things? Working with software, it's like children and animals. It's unpredictable and there's always bad news around. Realizing that actually it was the same problems coming round and round, but they weren't technical problems, they were people problems. And I became very curious about what would be useful to help people working in the tech space, whether they're developers or whether they're product owners or anybody else, get even more out of their roles and have better connection with each other and deliver the right thing on time to the right budget, which is really what it's all about. So I had started my people journey many years ago and came across the world of neuro-linguistic programming and studied with Dr. Richard Bandler and Paul McKenna and Michael Breen. So that was an interesting experience. And I blew hot and cold about that. But eventually I found some other coaching and communication approaches that felt a lot more comfortable and a lot more respectful as much as anything. And about 4 years ago, I decided to focus solely on coaching. And here I am now talking to you.
And those are some impressive figures that you've worked with and certainly taught alongside. I know I've met Paul McKenna myself, and he introduced me to havening, which is a wonderful psychosomatic technique. And what I love about what you've just said, Tony, is about how problems were coming around, like the same problems, different organization. I know that's how I felt in HR. Because actually, when it comes to resolving IT problems, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the people that you need to do that.
Yeah, and it's all about understanding each other, and it's all about being open and transparent with each other and challenging each other and all those basic interpersonal interactions.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, when we think about the world of business. And you and I both know that about 95, 96% of the way that we communicate, our thought processes, our emotional structures, all of that, almost like the motherboard of a computer, is managed by the unconscious mind.
Yeah.
And so our ability to resolve problems in the business world is fundamentally based on our own operating system. And yet, if we've never gone out of our way to evolve our own operating system, or the organization hasn't invested in us upgrading our operating system through whether that's leadership coaching or development or anything along those lines, then it's almost like we're still operating off those old Amstrad computers.
Yes, absolutely. And realizing that no amount of tools and techniques can compensate for being in the right mood. Jack Pransky has a lovely book about parenting. I think it's called Parenting from the Heart. Great book if you're a parent or you work with children. And he goes on to talk about how mood affects action. You can have all the tools and techniques that you want, but if you're not in the right mood, you'll either not remember to use them, or if you do, they won't come across the right way because kids tune into the feeling of what's going on. Likewise, if you're in the right mood, you won't need the tools and techniques. So increasingly, I focus on state, on innate well-being, on calm and how we are. And the reality is that if you are feeling calm and grounded, things will go a lot better, whether that's understanding software requirements or whether it's creative problem solving or anything else. If you are calm and grounded, it will go a lot better. We don't teach this to people. We don't get taught it as kids. Our parents generally wouldn't have got taught it. And at school and at university and even in the workplace. So as I enter Act 3 of my career, I realized that so much of it is just about how we are. And if we can get in the right mood, the right state, things will go a lot better.
And what's coming through from what you're describing there, Tony, is that level of self-awareness, that level of consciousness to even be able to identify what mood I'm in the first place, which might sound a bit bananas. I meet leaders and business leaders who don't necessarily even know that they are angry or controlling. I see that a lot in the corporate world, controlling. Anger, maybe, they can be quite angry in the way that they do business, but controlling. If they don't have that level of self-awareness, then they're just going to keep operating from that mainframe of their own internal computer, aren't they?
When it becomes pervasive and it's chronic and it's happening all the time, then you lose sight of that. If you're always running on adrenaline, if you're always controlling, then you'd find it hard to recognize that you're doing it because you're doing it all the time. And further, you might rationalize it as, well, what do you expect? That's how things are done around here, or that's the nature of leadership. Or, of course, we work in this kind of industry. Well, of course, I'm going to be stressed. Of course, I'm going to be wound up.
And it's interesting you say that, because I've lost count of the amount of organizations who I've spoken to or I've worked with that say, this is a very fast-paced environment.
Like a badge.
I do find that quite amusing, because I think I'd love to know how you're measuring fast-paced, like a fast-paced environment. How does anybody know when they work in something if it's fast-paced, if it's slow-paced, if it's medium-paced?
Well, and is it a euphemism? Is it a euphemism for disorganized high stress?
I'm going to throw that back the next time somebody says high-paced comment. Yeah, absolutely. So you're just, I love that. What does somebody need to have to operate in a fast-paced environment?
A lot of coping skills,
I would guess. And it feels like they never actually ask the question. It's almost that challenging the status quo, isn't it? That why do we think that fast-paced, whatever that actually does mean, is effective?
Well, and the tortoise and the hare.
I would imagine you've probably worked with a lot of hares in the form of burnt out individuals.
Helping those people find a way to go a bit slower or a bit more sustainably is just so important. Now, that's not to say that we should all be sitting around meditating at our desks. There needs to be a certain degree of momentum and energy. But There's something about the line between fun and frantic and beyond. And if that pace is triggering your fight, flight, or freeze response, then it's not fun anymore. What we have to remember is that those typical sort of responses serve us well when we have to run away from bears or lift boulders. That kind of, but they don't really help us in a board meeting or a team meeting or whatever, or a one-to-one or whatever it is, because we're not at any physical threat. And all of those body systems with the adrenaline and the cortisol and everything else, they're to do with actually avoiding physical threat, or responding to physical threat, should we say. And that's not what's going on in the workplace, unless you work in a workplace that has some degree of physical threat. But most of us, when we're just typing away on our computers, it's not that environment, fortunately.
Sometimes it's almost a sense, and this is only my personal sense from working with organizations, that there's a level of fear about teaching people to work at a calmer level, because it's almost like there's a misconception or a misperception that if we're teaching them that, they're not going to be as productive, the jobs aren't going to get done, that we need people to be able to respond in a demanding environment. And so I sometimes get this sense of, can you teach people to be a bit calmer, but not too calm, because we actually still have this belief that people need to be quite stressed to get the job done. Does that make sense?
Oh, total sense. But if you were to go to a surgeon for an operation, how would you like them to be? Somebody's hovering over me with a sharp knife. I think I want them to be pretty calm. Now, that's not to say they're not going to get the job done. But if they're all up in their head, never done this before, or let's just have a little go at that, or, oh dear, this could go really wrong because it's really serious because this person's really ill. How is that operation going to go?
Yeah.
Think about paramedics or other frontline workers where you don't know what's going to happen. Now, if you're a paramedic and you show up and you're panicking, what's that going to do to your patient? What's that going to do to the other people around? Why are you checking their blood pressure? Just put them in the van and off you go. Right? And the paramedic is going to be at their best when they're calm and they can access their learnt knowledge and their experience, and also their innate wisdom that will tell them what they need to do. If they're up in their head, like, oh dear, that does look bad, oh, that could have happened to me, or anything else that's going on, they're not going to do their best work. Now, I'm not saying that paramedics retain a Zen-like calm when they're doing what they're doing, but the closer they are to it, the better the job they're going to do. That's my contention.
Absolutely. And it feels like with many organizations, although it's slowly starting to change, that the big missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle is business leaders fundamentally understanding what does it take to achieve and sustain an optimal level of high performance. And as you said, I loved what you said there about that inner wisdom. And we know that we can't access that inner wisdom or that intuition, those solution-focused ideas, as you say. If we're caught up in our head, we can't be our most creative. We can't access the executive functions of the brain.
Yeah.
We're in the stress response.
Absolutely. So why would you go around wanting people to be stressed?
And actually, that's where our paths joined. They joined not because we were both stressed, but we came across each other actually through a shared interest in snow globes.
That's right.
Now, for people listening, they might be thinking, what's this got to do with stress? Where are they taking this conversation? But snow globes are actually a very powerful metaphor, aren't they, for the stress response?
Absolutely. And every time I share this, people get it. So I know that it's useful. So look, a snow globe contains snow, and there's something in the middle, and it's pretty when it's shaken. But when it's shaken, you can't clearly see the thing in the middle. That's how snow globes work. And so what needs to happen for you to see clearly again?
I'm guessing that we'd need to let it settle.
Right. Now, have you ever tried to force a snow globe to settle?
I can't say I have, actually.
What do you think might happen if you did?
I would imagine, trying to think of a snow globe that I had as a child. I think mine had glitter and snow in it. Oh, look, you've got one in your hand.
I've got a snow globe here. Yeah. Let's just try and...
I can't see what's inside. Oh, yours has got glitter and snow. It's very pretty. I would imagine that it would become quite frustrating trying to get it settle.
You might even just make it worse. If you were trying to tilt it strategically to make it settle in a certain way, you might make it worse. So what do you have to do? You just have to let it settle. And then you can see the thing in the middle clearly again. Now, this is a great metaphor for how we see the world around us. Out of curiosity, how many thoughts do you think we have every day?
I do know the answer to this question. Can't say exactly how many I have, probably 70,221.
Yeah, something like that. Plus or minus 3.
And should I have a glass of wine? Should I not have a glass of wine? That's my plus or minus 3.
It does that 35,000 times. So how many of your thoughts do you think about every day of those 70,000?
Oh, that's a great question. How many of those thoughts do I think about?
Because a thought is just something that bubbles up into your awareness, right? Yeah. So, yeah, how many do you think about? 10%, 25%, 50, 75? 100%?
I reckon about 10 to 15%.
It's definitely not 100%.
Oh, no. We'd never get anything done.
You wouldn't get anything done. And I'm guessing you'd feel quite overwhelmed. Thoughts come and go. And sometimes we start thinking about thoughts. And that's the thing that creates feelings, by the way. I don't know whether your listeners know that, but they do now. All feelings are telling you something about your thinking. That's all it is. They're not real.
But they can seem very real, can't they?
Oh, yeah, they seem very real. And we think they come from other people and things. But it's not true. All feelings are doing is telling you something about your thinking. If you're feeling angry, you're doing some angry thinking, right? If you're feeling happy, you're doing some happy thinking. That's all it is. So it's important to know that feelings don't come from people, and they don't come from situations, and they don't come from emails, and they don't come from songs, and they don't come from the future, and they certainly don't come from the past. They only come from you thinking about thoughts in the moment.
Absolutely.
Back to the snow globe. Our world, the world, is the thing in the middle, right? Everything outside us is in the middle of that snow globe. And the shaking of the snow globe is this process of thinking about thoughts. Right? And so therefore, the snow represents our state of mind. Yeah?
Yes.
Now, our snow globes are shaken for much of the time, and often we don't realize it. But when it's shaken, when we're doing a lot of thinking about our thoughts, we can't see clearly anymore. And why is that important? Because you can't make good decisions. Because you can't access your innate wisdom. So, here's the $1 million question for you. Who shakes the snow globe? Is it other people? Is it situations or something else?
Do I really get $1 million if I get this right? Can I do 50-50?
Call a friend.
It's me, isn't it? It's me shaking my own inner snow globe.
Right. And that's why the metaphor is particularly valuable, because when you look at a snow globe, you'll see it in a hand. If it's swirling, it has been in a hand, and that hand is yours. So nobody else is shaking it. It's just you. If your snow globe is shaken, what could you do? If you're up in your thinking?
Yeah, great question. Because actually, a lot of people I hear struggle with this. They're like, how I get really caught in my head, and how do I stop it? Or how do I change my thinking? And it's like, well, you can't change your thinking until things have settled. But I can only share what I find most effective for myself is just recognizing that this is just thinking. And when I recognize that it's just thinking, it's like the snow globe just starts to settle all by itself.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. And the sooner you recognize it's just your thinking, the better it's going to be. And the later you realize it, you've already given stuff a good shake. And as you said, you can't think your way out of a feeling. If you've ever told anybody to calm down or cheer up, or if anybody's told you
They've
that.
They've usually shook their snow globe even more, haven't they?
Right, yeah. Don't you tell me to calm down. I can't cheer up. It doesn't work.
No.
So you can't do that. And the trouble is that we often think that we can. And if I just shake the snow globe a bit harder, I'll get some more clarity. But all you're going to see is more and more snow. And you can't see what's really going on. Now, unlike the snow globe, you can do something else in that you can interrupt it. You could do something like, have you ever done burpees?
I have, and then I ended up spending an awful lot of money on an osteopath, so I don't do those anymore. Okay. I do star jumps.
Oh, star jumps. They're just as good. Yeah, and by the way, we're not insured for anybody who's trying to do. But doing something that's intensely physical, like star jumps, like burpees, it's hard to think of anything else other than make it stop, unless you're one of these people who loves it and you'll be like, yeah, I want to do more. But for most of us, it's make it stop.
No, I've started to do weightlifting, like proper deadlift weightlifting recently. And I promise you, I could not think of anything whilst my focus of attention is on that. Except this is heavy.
And grunting and all the stuff that goes with that. But you can't be thinking about that. I mean, are you doing it properly if you're not grunting? I don't know. You can't be thinking about that thing that your boss said to you when you've got a big chunk of metal over your head, if you're bench pressing or if you're carrying something heavy, if you're deadlifting or if you're doing star jumps or burpees. So do something like that. But another fun one to do is, especially if you're working from home, have you got any scented candles?
I do. I have a bit of an obsession with scented candles, I have to confess.
Do you? Oh, I'm just going to get one. Hang on. Right, I've got a scented candle. Have you got a scented candle nearby?
No, but I have got an essential oil diffuser on.
Oh, okay. Be careful. So I was going to say, so with a scented candle, if you make sure it's not lit, and again, we're not insured. Dear listener, we're not insured if it's lit. But if you take a scented candle and just give it a good old inhale, or essential oils or anything else like that that's very strong, and obviously don't choose something you're allergic to or that's going to remind you of that traumatic breakup that you had. Choose something that's just pleasant and have a good old sniff. It stops your thinking.
Very true. Very true.
It floods your brain and it stops you thinking. And that can be enough to just have a momentary insight, the fact that all it was that you were just doing a bit too much thinking. Yeah. And you can do it with things, obviously box breathing and meditation are ways to do that as well. You can do things like, how many toes do you have?
Well, the last time I checked, I had 10.
Right. Let's just check now. And dear listener, you can do it. Now, don't do this if you're driving because you might, accelerate or brake or something. But see if you can just, with your eyes shut or not looking at your feet, see if you can count your toes.
The nursery rhyme immediately came into my mind. This little piggy went to market.
There you go. Well, and how many little piggies can you count? Just by wiggling them.
Oh, yeah. No, I've still got 10 toes, Tony.
Yeah. And how much thinking are you doing about other things when you do that?
Absolutely none.
Yeah, exactly. So just focusing on some physical sensation, whether it's counting your toes or whether it's just fiddling with something, just really get into focusing on it. They are great ways to interrupt what's going on. So you can do all of that in meetings. You might not have a scented candle handy and you might not be able to do star jumps in a client meeting. There are things you can do to interrupt things. But what would be a better strategy, do you think?
To not shake that snow globe in the first place.
Thank you for playing. Ding, ding. You win the prize. Yeah, don't shake it. And the trouble is that, as I said before, shaking it often feels good. Even if it's in anger,
yeah.
A van driver's just splashed you as you were walking down the street. There's a certain amount of anger that would feel really good in that situation, in shaking your fist as they drive off into the distance. But when you do that, it's going to take time to settle.
It is. And actually, it's also allowing us, most of the time we don't need to shake that snow globe, and sometimes it is going to naturally get shaken. Like I had a conversation with an HR director this week who's been told that she's been made redundant after 19 years of service. Now it's very natural that her snow globe was doing a lot of shaking.
Blizzard conditions.
Absolutely. And so we need to process, process that shock and that all of that emotion, because as you say, we can't always just switch it off. We have to wait for it to settle, don't we?
Yeah. If it stops serving you well, then maybe that's the time to stop shaking it any further. If you're getting so upset by something that's present or past or future, and if you don't need to, maybe it's good not to.
Absolutely. And especially around, as you say, past, present and future, because we come across so many people, don't we, that do that what if thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And they're shaking future snow globes.
The thing is that your feelings can't come from the future because they haven't figured out time travel.
No, not yet. Not unless it's, who is it? Doctor Who?
Just in the same way they can't come from emails. Google hasn't invented a way for you to feel bad. It's got nothing to do with it. When I'm working with people experiencing burnout, one of the questions that I ask them often, and they often don't like me asking, is, what's your involvement in all of this? Because, of course, it's the toxic work culture and it's the evil boss and the market conditions and all that stuff. But actually, so much of what causes people to eventually become burnt out, which is generally due to prolonged unmanaged stress, is about unnecessary vigorous shaking of the snow globe. If you can see your hand reaching out to get the snow globe, you do have a choice if you can catch yourself doing it.
That's actually a very powerful visualization. I can see my hand I could see that in my mind, like reaching out, as you say, for it.
So you do have a moment. The snow globe doesn't suddenly appear in your hand, right? There's the act of reaching out for it.
Yes. Because I know certainly one of the things which we teach around when we first start to learn this stuff, if we've never practiced not shaking our snow globe or having shaken it and allowing it to settle, a lot of leaders sometimes say, how do I remember to not shake it, or how do I remember to settle it? And it's like, well, you could have a big post-it note on your
you could have a snow globe.
You could have a snow globe, absolutely. I think snow globes are going to go out of stock after people have listened to this podcast. It's very natural, isn't it, that sometimes when we're so deep into the shaking that we might not necessarily realize we've shaken it because we've got any number of thoughts, pieces of snow darting around our mind that we can't see within the thick of it.
Well, going from heavy snow to blizzard is quite subtle.
Exactly.
You can't see. Yeah.
But things do. The more that we catch ourselves, I certainly know from my own experience, the more I catch myself and go, I'm just shaking my globe.
Yeah. And that's all it is.
Yeah.
And you can ask yourself if you needed to or if you wanted to. And if you didn't need to or you didn't want to, then that's some information for next time. But what does eventually happen is that you do begin to notice when you're about to do it.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you're present enough, you can make an informed decision about whether it's worth it.
It's funny, actually. I had a manager on one of our management mental health training courses this week who I did have to laugh because we talked.
Well, that's a good way to interrupt the snow, by the way, is laughing.
Laughing, absolutely.
If somebody wrongs you, just laugh. If you're going to laugh later, why not laugh now?
We were talking about her calming down her mind because she's an excessive overthinker. So she shakes that snow globe a lot. She said, I haven't got time to meditate. I said, how much time do you waste overthinking? And she went, oh, hours. I said, okay, well, if you waste hours overthinking, I'm kind of guessing you might have 5 minutes to just practice a bit of meditation. Because we do, don't we? We waste hours going over and over things.
Yeah, and you never get clarity. I always say overthinking is overrated. Overthinking is overrated. Thinking is valuable, but overthinking, no.
Absolutely. So I'm guessing that all of our listeners are going to go and buy themselves a snow globe. If you're in New York, you can get one of the Rockefeller Centre. If you're in London, Tower Bridge. If you're in Scotland, maybe get Edinburgh Castle. And you can pop it on your desk, and that can be your best Christmas present, can't it?
What would happen if, especially as leaders, if we were able to be much more deliberate about our state, rather than assuming that we're a victim of circumstances and that the reason we're feeling a certain way is because of stuff that happened outside? What would happen for us in terms of our well-being, and what would happen for the well-being of the people around us? As leaders, we're privileged to have people working with us, and we can have a massive impact, for better or for worse, on those people.
Indeed.
And would you rather be the kind of leader that helps people stay calm under pressure? Because there's nothing about this that says you can't have pressure, but it's just about what frame of mind you're in when you're experiencing the pressure. Or would you have people who feel fearful and stressed under pressure? And it doesn't have to be the latter. There's a way for your team to remain calm, even when stuff is stacking up. We should never assume that the only acceptable response is stress, anxiety, and all those other things. If you can show your team that under pressure, that you're still able to remain calm, guess what? It's back to parenting again. We learn so much of our behavior in the workplace from our leaders. And as leaders, we have a tremendous responsibility for that. So if we can set some good examples that, okay, the first thing we do when pressure arises or unexpected stuff happens is get calm and stay calm. And then we know that we can access our innate wisdom and we can have so many more resources at our disposal than if we're all running around in a panic, or if we're all scared of getting found out or blamed, or any of the other things that happen in the workplace.
Indeed. And that feels like a wonderful place to leave today, with that thought about, as you say, just what a profound impact that would have for all of you listening, about creating that very deliberate, how you're showing up. So we're going to invite all of you to go out and buy a snow globe. It's the perfect time of year for you, even if you live in Australia or India or Bali or somewhere that's hot. I'm sure that you can track down a snow globe.
I saw one in Egypt.
Let me guess what it had inside. Every time that you look at that, you're just reminded, you're just taking yourself back to this conversation about where this experience is coming from. Thank you so much, Tony. That's been a wonderful, insightful, glorious conversation, and the best kind of Christmas present that I think we can leave our leaders with. And for anybody that's listening to this that would like to reach out to you, Tony, how can they get a hold of you?
The easiest way is just to go to tonypiper.coach. And I'm Tony Piper Coach on Twitter, and will shortly be on Instagram, and I'm even on YouTube. So there you go.
Wonderful. So wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. If we don't get another podcast created, because Christmas is approaching, I've got my tree ready to be decorated with its snow globes and its baubles. And Tony and I are going to go and have some fun with some snow globes. So goodbye for now.